Welcome to Northwest Book Talk on 99.9 KXRW with your host, Patty Grasher. Stay tuned to connect with book lovers and book writers of the local area. On the show, you'll discover new books, take a look at older but great books, and tune in as Patty talks with Northwest authors, book coaches, educators, bookshops, and yes, even librarians. If books are your passion, stay tuned and connected with Northwest Book Talk.
Hi, and welcome to Northwest Book Talk. I'm your host, Patty Grasher, and today my guest is with Dede Montgomery. She's an author, both nonfiction and fiction, and she's going to share with us her writing journey, some tips that she's found and discovered, and some maybe even a few mishaps that got her along that way. So welcome, Dede, to the program.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So, Dede, I want to start off first, not with your writing journey, but let's start off with the book that you just got published. It's just hit the streets, shall we say, and tell us about that book.
Yes, thank you for asking. I just released March 19th a memoir. It's my second memoir. This one is titled From First Breath to Last, a story about love, womanhood, and aging. It's published by the same publisher that I've used for all four of my published books, Bedazzled Ink Publishing. And it's really, I think the key themes are mother-daughter, aging, womanhood, differences between generations in women also.
So let's start with some of the challenges of doing a book that covers such a wide span of time.
I think the largest challenge, and I think what's unique about this book, and a couple people have commented on this to me, is I weave my mom's writing directly with my writing. And so my mother died in 2021, and she was a prolific writer, both professionally as well as personally. When she was in her 70s, she lived to nearly 88. When she was in her 70s, she pulled together her own unpublished memoir, which was nearly 300 pages, of which she collected her journal, her letters, and really looking back at her life at that point in her life. And so, in addition to that, she had a dissertation and she had a book she'd published in the late 1990s. And so I really had this opportunity to directly weave her look at things with my look at things and our journey together. I think what's interesting as people look at the book is there's two fonts within the book. There's my writing in one font and her writing in another font. So my answer to your question is, there was a lot that I could write about. We were very close. And yet, as I think people who write memoir know, the challenge is you have to keep on theme. It's not a biography. And so I think that was probably the most challenging and probably the emotional part of it also, because I continue to miss my mother very much.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a hard thing to kind of go through. So, what made you want to do a memoir in the first place?
It's interesting. The two memoir I've written, one was after my father died, and I can talk more about that later, but that was my first book. And I realized, although he had lived a long life, there was so much in the storytelling that he liked to do. He was also a writer, a journalist. And then as I had all this family history in Oregon, so his was a bit different, where I weave that along with my love of him and our own journey, which included some difficulty. With my mom, I think it was this recollection that she had really wanted to write another book in her life. She was known for teaching at the college level around women in midlife and mothers and daughters, ironically. And she had pitched a book in her younger years with another friend about women in midlife that had never been published. And so I think kind of knowing that and knowing how much there was in this story, that although unique to her and me, there's such common themes for, I think, all women. It just felt like there was a story there to do that. And although my book is very different than what she would have written, I do it, that's why I wrote it. And I will tell you, it's really important to me that towards the end of her life, I did start writing about her, blogging about her a little bit, and including about dementia, which she did have, and she was good with that. We talked about that, and I think that was really important to me.
Were there any surprises for you in writing a memoir? Did you think it was going to be easier than it was or more difficult? What was that?
I'm grateful that as a writer, I have, knock on wood, I don't think I've experienced writer's block like some people do. So I kind of write as almost a stream of consciousness, which I have to be careful about, and I have to become a little more sometimes focused on where I'm going with my writing. That being said, I think again, what's difficult with both memoir for me was you think of this great story. We all have these great stories that, oh, that's fun to share, or even sad stories. That's something someone might like to know about. But if it doesn't fall within really the themes of in my opinion, my stories or my memoir, then it kind of didn't have a place. It was just an extraneous feature. And so I think that's probably the hardest part. And even when I finish this book, it's a short book. It's only 110 pages. But I really wanted to be really diligent to the pieces of the story that I wanted to share, not everything that could have been shared.
Okay, so was there any kind of training or thought process that went into your knowing that you had to stay on that one theme, you had to stay on that one track in order to make the book cohesive?
That's such a great question. I am uh, I'm very disciplined as a writer, but I'm non-traditional in how I have become a writer. So, because it's kind of how I do things, I did, especially with my first memoir, I read a lot online about, how to write memoir, pitfalls, the tips. I went to a couple sessions at a conference, Willamette Writers, one year that was helpful around plot. I also read a lot of memoir, and I always have. And so I think for me, I'm very much I know it when I see it, I know it when I feel it, I write from my heart, I trust my instincts. And so I think for me, it's a lot more of that. Now, I will say the difference with my second memoir is I have been in a writing group for the last 3 years, and I'm grateful for that. We've met remotely nearly every 2 weeks. And so this book and my previous book have both been shared with the writers in my writing group. And I do believe I've become a better writer in part through that experience and that feedback from others. And I think what writers know is we don't take everything everyone tells us, but it's important to get feedback, and then we put that into the vault of what else we know and feel in our heart to come out with what we think can be the best way to say something or do something, or what to share.
How did you start journaling?
I do teach sessions or lead workshops on writing for well-being, specifically journaling. And I don't consider myself an expert in any of this. My academic degrees are in biology and public health, but I've experienced a lot through my life, as we all have. And so in journaling, I think in the seventh grade, I got one of those little locked journals that had a little space for each day of the year. And why I have used that as an example is I hated that format. I felt so much pressure because I'm a little bit of a rule follower. I've been working on that. But I felt like if I didn't write each day, then I was failing. And so I would tell you that first journal or that first diary was not, I don't know how much I shared my heart in there really. But in the next year, I just started writing on spiral notebooks. And I think for me, journaling was really important in large part to what was going on in my life. We had two family moves that were difficult socially for me. We moved from Wilsonville to La Grande when I'd finished sixth grade, having spent my whole childhood in a very rural town. Then in the middle of 8th grade, we moved from LeGrand, where I'd been in the junior high there, to Ainsworth Elementary in Portland in the middle of 8th grade. And so the journal was really a spot for me to share so much in addition to what was going on with my parents. Because even though they divorced when I was, you know, 18 or 19, clearly there were issues underlying that throughout my childhood. I think it's really important to understand the evidence around the power of journaling. And what we know is that not just sharing of what we're writing, it's kind of like it's one of the few places we have the opportunity to be totally honest with ourselves if we let ourselves. And understand it's a process because it's also the processing of memories and processing of thoughts, whether that's reworking a memoir or writing in my journal and occasionally looking back at where I've come from. That's what's so powerful about the potential around well being. So I think that I like to invite people to write however they want to write. So much of my early writing, it's incomplete sentences. I'm not trying to write to be beautiful or to have beautiful writing. I'm just really trying to share what my heart is feeling and to be gentle with ourselves. I think those are my key tips.
You wrote about your mom. That's one memoir. And so, how was it writing about your dad? That was definitely a journey.
It was really a wonderful experience. It did help me walk through the grief and loss that I felt. My dad also had an unusual story. Again, I really believe we all have unusual stories. And that's why writing, whether it's for ourselves or others, is just so beautiful and creative and powerful. My father stopped was a journalist, was really known in the Portland and beyond areas being a maritime historian. He retired from the Port of Portland. He did writing for the port. He loved the river. And so that theme of the river flows through my first book, which is called My Music Man. I've had the opportunity to share that book in a number of different historical contexts because what I also did was weave my sixth generation of family into that book. On my dad's side, my great great greats came around the Horn by sailing ship up the Columbia River separately in 1837 and 1840. So what I would say is preceding the Oregon Trail. They came with adjacently missionaries. And so this river theme between them, my father loved boating, we grew up boating, and plus he had that maritime history interest. But the other piece about writing about my dad was I'm so grateful that my father stopped drinking at the age of around 50. And he never looked back, and he lived to nearly 85. And he was active in AA. He mentored others. He was really believed in the 12 steps. And because of that, we talked through everything. He and my mom divorced but remarried after 8 years. So there's a whole nother story in there that you'll get pieces of in both of my memoir.
Well, that is fascinating. Let me just think here for the next question. Oh, I know. Yeah. I don't get where the title My Music Man came from.
Yeah, it's so there's a whole chapter in that book about music. Music was really powerful in our family, as it is in many. Not that they were big musicians, but we had music on the phonograph in those days all the time. All the musicals from the 50s and 60s, the classics, Gershwin, whatever. My grandfather, my father's father, was a musician. He played the cello. He loved it in the 1970s. He donated his collection of John McCormick, who was an Irish tenor, to the Multnomah County Library, and it was said to be one of the largest collections in the world. So there's some Irish roots through my family. So My Music Man came to me because that was my father's favorite musical. And there's a little piece in here about me taking him to see that with my mother a month before he died at a local theater. And I'll leave it at that. But that is really kind of the theme. And so if you see the cover of the book, there's a photo of us in our boat as children on the Willamette River, but there's a theme of music circling around that. So I really like to think as well of the music of the river, as that's been an important theme.
That's beautiful. Let's go back into some of your other books. So you've done 2 memoirs. What other kinds of writing have you done?
So I have done basically literary fiction. My second book, after my Music Man, I just needed to keep writing, and I'd already started blogging. But I had this memory of when I was a little girl and we lived on the Willamette River. Again, that river theme. I put a note in a bottle, and in a silly way, when you think about it, I had, Wilsonville was rural in those days. Less than 1,000 people. We had an 8th-grade school with 1 class per grade. I had 4 brothers. We had a few neighbor kids that were all boys, and I wanted more girlfriends. So I put a note in a bottle, thinking I'll find a friend, which is really funny. And what's interesting about that is I did get a man further downriver in West Lynn, found my bottle, mailed it back to me with a little note saying, "Hey, try again." He sent back the bottle, the cork, all the ways I'd kind of tied it together with the note. And that gave me an idea. That's a long story, I know, but so I wanted to try creative fiction, and I think memoir helped me be better ready to do that as more of a scientist, which is really more of my profession. And I wrote a book. So my next book is called Beyond the Ripples. And it starts with a girl that puts a note in a bottle, but I put her further upriver. She's in Newburgh. And the bottle gets further. It gets all the way to Westport, Oregon. And I create this story where, through the connection of somebody finding that bottle and people related to him, I create this connection of people finding each other kind of serendipitously at times when they really need that person in their life. So it's really about friendship between 2 middle-aged, I don't know if it's fair to call them middle-aged women. They're probably in their late 40s, early 50s, no, probably 40s, who just connect over this theme of a bottle. So I'll leave it at that. So that was my next book, and definitely literary fiction.
You're listening to Northwest Book Talk. I am your host, Patty Grasher. I'm here today with memoir and fiction author Dede Montgomery. When we come back, we're going to talk about Dede's marketing journey, her finding and working with a small publisher to becoming an established author.
KXRW programming like this is made possible with the support of The Columbian, proud to be Southwest Washington's leading news source. Since 1920, the Campbell family has owned and operated The Columbian and ensured its award-winning news coverage. For the most thorough daily coverage of local news, national news, and local sports, both in print and online, and for subscription information, visit Columbian.com. That's COLUMBIAN.com.
KXRW is supported by founding partners Morel Inc. Print and Marketing. Since 1993, Morel Inc. has offered high-quality, creative, and innovative solutions from their women-owned, union-staffed, state-of-the-art print shop. Morel Inc.'s experienced staff uses the latest technology to solve clients' marketing needs and within their budget. Find Morel Inc. at morelinc.com. That's MORELINK.com.
Welcome back to Northwest Book Talk. I'm your host, Patty Grasher. I'm here today with Dede Montgomery with more behind the scenes of what it takes to write, publish, and market a memoir and other books.
Let's talk about your book marketing journey. I know with your latest book, you've done some different ways to get the word out, this radio program being one. But what are some of the other things you've done that others might be interested in following along as well?
Marketing is so tough, and it's the one thing you'll hear authors, especially authors who are either self-published or have smaller indies publishers. There's so much out there right now, and I think what I've learned is a couple things. First, I've learned to stop putting too much pressure on myself. I'm really grateful I have a day job in that I write because I love it. And because now I've had a few books come out, I do have a following. It's probably a small following. I am appreciative of that. I'm appreciative of the emails and the comments I get from people that my books spoke to them. So when I'm planning events now, I am really trying to think about where will I find my followers? It's one thing to do a release in the Portland area where I have community. And I did several different book talks and they were well attended. I also have a big following in my local community, so I always do something locally that I know those folks who are more engaged in my community and maybe know more about me personally. Every book talk's a little different. I also gave one in Missoula, which had not spoken about any of my other books there, but I have a pretty good community there. That was my college town. I still have friends and family there. And it spoke to me for my most recent book because my mom had pretty good connections and she loved Missoula. So I'm using that as an example because it so depends on really recognizing who are people that are going to be interested in your book. My newest book, I think, is particularly of interest to women who are probably 40 and older. I've had men read it and enjoy it, so I'm not saying I'm not going to market to them, but I'm thinking about that. And I'll compare that to my first book, My Music Man. There was a lot of Oregon history and old Oregon stories. I gave a talk, for example, at our Capitol. I was invited to be there on Oregon's birthday to talk about this book because of the linkage with my great grandparents and their land claim there in Salem. So I think, and I also gave quite a few talks at various historical societies, and I was able to amplify that history piece. So in marketing, it's finding your followers, and that can be hard. It's aligning yourself with other authors so that you can co-support each other. It's finding your libraries. It's talking to people like you. Thank you very much. Looking for those sources that are interested not just in books, but sharing the word. And then it's doing social media, which, we all probably have these mixed feelings about. I think my blog helps a lot too. I do a lot of content that there's people that follow my blogs that have probably never read my books, frankly.
Let's talk about your publisher. How did you find your publisher and how is that journey?
It's been wonderful, and I do consider myself quite lucky. I know a lot of people struggling to find publishers, and I do think times have changed. I'm kind of grateful that, I signed my first contract in 2016, and my book came out in 2017. I do know things have gotten more difficult in the last few years, whether that's pandemic related or what. And the book business is tough. Most of these small publishers are not making any money. So you have to be savvy to also support your publisher. I think it's realistic as an author to understand that you do have to do your own marketing too. And I know there's some authors that have struggled with that. I found my publisher when I had My Music Man ready to go, or what I thought was ready to go. And I'll tell you, I hired my daughter to be my developmental author. She had just finished an undergraduate environmental writing program, and she's a wonderful writer. And she really helped me not be such a sloppy writer, I think, which is really what I was. Anyway, I had my sights set on a certain university press. And I got, I had a query. I sent in the manuscript. I sent in a second manuscript. But I also knew there were pieces of this that I didn't want to change. And at the same time, I had it out to a couple other small publishers. I'm unusual. I probably didn't submit to more than, I probably didn't query more than 8 or 10 publishers. And I don't even know that I queried that many. I tried agents for about 5 letters and decided I would just go straight to the small publishers that didn't require you to be agented. And I just hit it off with Bedazzled Ink Press. They have a theme. They tended to look for books similar to what I was writing. And I would say I appreciate that. I feel like we've been loyal to each other during this journey. But they really believe in telling the story, the protagonist being female, or let me back up and say, I think they really prefer to tell stories that aren't just those stories that you might read in your traditional news outlets. And so I think my theme, I'll tell you, my first chapter that I submitted was the one that's called Baseball, where I talk about, pushing back against being kind of a girl in the sense of not being allowed to do certain things in the 60s and catching up with my brothers. And I played Little League in a time that was unusual. And I weaved some of that into one of my first chapters that I submitted when I queried. And I think that kind of spoke to them.
You say you've self-published a book that was more like just a PDF. What aspect does the publisher do for you that you think takes maybe a step from just self-publishing?
Oh, I like that. I think for me, and this isn't for everybody, I knew I did not want to do the mechanics of the actual publishing part of it. I wanted to do the writing, and I'm happy I can handle technology and all that, but I was very happy to turn making it look good, making the format be desirable, and the final editing, all those things. I was very happy not to do those things. I know people who self-publish, and many people who self-publish make more money than some of us traditional writers. But again, you have to decide what is your thing. I think the other thing that can be frustrating when you're traditionally published is sometimes you have to wait a while. Some larger press, you're going to wait two years or more before your book's going to see print. And so for folks who just really want to get it out there now, I have a couple of friends who are older authors who just hired a vanity press because it was kind of like, I want to get this thing out there while I still have time.
Going with a traditional publisher, has that put you into different venues that maybe wouldn't be as open for self-publisher, getting into different stores and things like that?
I think it does. I think one thing it definitely does. Now, it's hard to get into stores. I'll still have stores that want to consign my books versus some stores that straight out order them. And not a lot, I would not say, I think more commonly for people like me, they may just say you can order your book through our store. But one big advantage is because of the distributors. So bookstores can often order your books, and then if they don't sell, they can go back at no cost.
Right.
Right. So I do think that's a big piece that might be the biggest piece. You probably might get a different feedback from a bookstore owner, but I think that's a big piece.
What do you think about your writing journey as being self-fulfilling?
I have told people that writing has been one of the most important things I've done for my well-being. Journaling was important up to that, but this part of my life, writing, I've learned so much about myself, just the creative passion for being able to do that.
Thanks, Dede, for being with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
That's all the time we have for today. To see and hear more about today's guest, Dede Montgomery, and her books and what's going on at KXRW and X-Ray FM, join the conversation at kxrwvancouver.fm. If you would like to donate, please visit us on the web at www.kxrwvancouver.fm and click on the donate button. For all the volunteers and supporters who make community radio possible, this is Patty Grasher, and I want to thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you again right here on Northwest Book Talk.